Alright, this is the second video for 3.13 and we were in the middle of reading the day's lesson, so let's finish that up. The United States at war's end. And here's a picture in Times Square celebrating Victory in Japan Day, as they called it the kissingest day in history. And actually, before I begin the United States at war's end, let's read this insert, Seeking Just Punishment. Shortly after the war, the Allies put Nazi leaders on trial to bring them to justice through legal means. Under what law could the Nazis be charged? No international legal system existed. The Allies decided to establish a special court, the International Military Tribunal, representing many nations. They chose the German city of Nuremberg as the trial site and defined the crimes for which Nazis would be tried. Crimes against peace, including starting an unprovoked war of aggression. War crimes included acts as sending prisoners to slave labor camps. Crimes against humanity include murder, enslavement, and inhumane acts against civilians. In the first year of the Nuremberg trials, 12 of 22 men on trial were convicted and sentenced to death. Similar trials took place in Tokyo, where 25 Japanese leaders were convicted and 7 executed. Together, the Nuremberg and Tokyo trials demonstrated that the world's leaders could be held accountable to laws that cross international boundaries. The United States at war's end. World War II was the most destructive war in history, killing tens of millions of civilians and soldiers alike. Hitler's Nazi regime committed the world's worst genocide, slaughtering 6 million Jews and several million other civilians in the Holocaust. For the first and only time to this day, atomic bombs were used in combat. World War II had lasting effects on American society and government and transformed the economy. Women and blacks entered the industrial workforce in large numbers. Industries expanded, new technologies were developed, and the Great Depression ended. American factories had produced many of the weapons and supplies needed for the Allied victory. The United States, which saw no fighting in its mainland, entered the war with a booming economy that constituted nearly 50% of the world's wealth. The United States emerged from the conflict as the richest, most powerful nation in the world. Representative government and the ideals of democracy survived against the aggression of fascist dictators because of the efforts of millions of individual military men and women, the careful planning of military strategists, and the combined efforts of politicians, industrial leaders, and the civilian population. And now, historical close-up, planning the post-war peace, the World Bank, and the United Nations. In July 1944, as the Allies confidently looked forward to the defeat of Germany and Japan, they sent representatives to a conference that met in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. The purpose of the Bretton Woods Conference was to reach agreements to help ensure economic stability in the post-war world. The conference set up the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, to foster economic cooperation and coordination between different countries and to oversee exchange rates, the international value of national currencies, for example, how many American dollars are worth a British pound. Those gathered in Bretton Woods also established the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, later part of the World Bank. After the war, the World Bank loaned money to help ravaged nations rebuild and thus encourage renewed world trade. The bank also provided loans and grants to help developing countries build a modern infrastructure, the basic physical structures of a modern society, such as roads, water supply, electrical power, and communication networks. In a later meeting in October of 1947, representatives of 23 nations met in Geneva, Switzerland to discuss arrangements for promoting the free trade among nations. It was not that long ago, as those gathered in Geneva would well recall, the problems of the Great Depression were made worse by protectionism, the policy by which a country taxes imported goods in order to protect its own industries from foreign competition. The Geneva meeting produced the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT. This treaty committed the cooperating nations to a substantial reduction on custom tariffs and other impediments to trade, and the elimination of discriminatory practices in international trade. In the years ahead, the agreement was expanded to further lower barriers to trade, and in 1995, the World Trade Organization was established to carry on the GATT mission of promoting free trade. The United Nations. Also before World War II ended, the Allied leaders met to plan an international organization that would work to prevent war, promote cooperation among countries, and help settle international disputes. This new organization was intended to succeed where the old League of Nations had failed. The League of Nations failed in part because the United States refused to join it. To prevent that from happening again, President Franklin Roosevelt convened a meeting in August 1944 in Dumbarton Oaks, an estate in Washington, D.C. There, delegates from the Soviet Union, the United States, Great Britain, and China hammered out a structure for the new international peacekeeping organization. After Franklin Roosevelt died, Harry Truman continued the push to create the United Nations. Starting in the spring of 1945, the United States hosted an international conference in San Francisco. 50 nations sent representatives, and they filled in the plan sketched at Dumbarton Oaks. On October 24th, 1945, the United Nations was born. And here's its logo there, the flag. President Truman asked Roosevelt's widow, Eleanor, to join the first U.S. delegation to the United Nations. She was appointed chairman of a committee to draft a Declaration of Human Rights that everyone could embrace, regardless of culture or country. She knew the committee's members did not agree on key questions, but her warmth, good humor, and stamina helped the group turn tangled arguments into a single, unified statement of principles. The finished statement, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, took a bold stand on individual rights. It called for freedom of expression, for human dignity, and for safety from torture or enslavement. It also insisted on the right to work, to rest, and to have food, clothing, housing, and medical care. And there's a picture of Eleanor Roosevelt holding the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. On December 10, 1948, the United Nations adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The statement itself did not make the world a just place, but it did take a dramatic stand on rights and freedoms, especially dramatic in contrast to the wartime years just past, during which so many rights and freedoms have been so flagrantly violated. The structure of the United Nations. The basic plan agreed on at Dumbarton Oaks remains in place at the UN to this day. The United Nations is divided into two chambers. One chamber, the General Assembly, includes delegates from all the member nations. Each nation, big or small, has one vote. The General Assembly democratically discusses and decides important matters. The other chamber is the Security Council. Originally, there were 5 permanent members of the Security Council: China, Great Britain, France, the Soviet Union, and the United States, plus 6 non-permanent members with 2-year terms. Today, 15 countries sit on the Security Council, but only 5, the People's Republic of China, Great Britain, France, Russia, and the United States, have permanent seats. Any one of the permanent members of the Security Council can veto decisions made by the rest of the Council. And here's the UN building in New York City. And here are the excerpts of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. On December 10, 1948, the United Nations adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as a common standard of achievement for all people in all nations. Here are some of the rights set forth in the 30 articles of the Declaration. And I won't read through all of these, but just a sampling. Article 1. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in spirit of brotherhood. Article 2. Everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. Article 3. Everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. Article 4. No one should be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all their forms. Article 4. No one should be held. I read that one already. Article 5. No one shall be subjected or tortured to. No one should be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. Article 7. All are equal before the law and are entitled without any discrimination to equal protection of the law. Article 18. Everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. Article 19. Everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. Article 21. Everyone has a right to take part in the government of his country, directly or through freely chosen representatives. The will of the people shall be the basis of authority of government. Article 23. Everyone has the right to work, to free choice of employment, to just and favorable conditions of work, and protection against unemployment. Article 24. Everyone has the right to rest and leisure, including reasonable limitations of working hours and periodic holidays with pay. Article 25. Everyone has a right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and his family, including food, clothing, housing, and medical care and necessary social services. Article 26. Everyone has a right to education. Education should be free, at least in the elementary and fundamental stages. And that, I believe, is the end of that chapter. So let's go back now to our lesson. And be sure that you've checked your reading guide and checked it over with the lesson answer key. And let's continue on. Fascism defeated. With the war in Europe over, the United States and its allies focused their efforts on ending the war in the Pacific. The decision on how exactly to end the war would rest on the shoulders of one man, Harry S. Truman, who had become president after Roosevelt's untimely death. Click Fighting Two Wars below and follow the directions on the student guide to continue today's lesson. Okay. Fighting two wars. Hundreds of black pilots who had graduated from the Tuskegee Army Airfield fought bravely and with distinction in North Africa, Sicily, and Italy during World War II. Sadly, they also had to fight against racism and bigotry both at home and overseas. After the war in Europe ended, the Tuskegee Airmen returned home and faced continued racism despite their outstanding war record. What's the big idea? Remember this, the Allied victory over the aggression of fascist dictators resulted from the efforts of millions of individual military men and women, the careful planning of military strategists, superiority in resources, and the combined efforts of politicians, industrial leaders, and the civilian population, including women, minorities, and children. Chapter 32 highlights. Oh, don't forget to also look at your Allied specific push sheet. And there's a map in Chapter 32 that you'll use to complete that. And you can also check your answers with the lesson answer key if you're unsure about any of those things. So let's read through the Chapter 32 highlights, and then you'll take the 3.13 quiz. As the United States faced the challenges of the Great Depression and withdrew from international affairs in the 1920s and 30s, European economies collapsed, giving rise to fascist dictators like Hitler in Germany and Mussolini in Italy. To gain natural resources for growing industries at home, Hitler occupied the Rhineland, annexed Austria, and invaded Czechoslovakia, while Mussolini invaded Ethiopia. In the Soviet Union, Stalin's communist government, though different from the fascist governments in Germany and Italy in terms of economic policies, was a totalitarian and brutal regime. Despite the changes in Europe, the United States returned to the isolationism of the past with the passage of 5 neutrality laws. Germany invaded Poland, plunged Europe into war, and quickly overran most of Europe, leaving Churchill to lead the British against Germany. Roosevelt articulated the 4 freedoms he hoped to guide the post-war world: speech, religion, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. Roosevelt moved to assist the British and prepare the United States for war with cash and carry program, the Lend-Lease program, and endorsement of a selective service bill. The Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941 brought the United States into World War II. Unprepared for all-out conflict, the United States began arming itself through a combination of federal agencies, WBP, and private industries. As men enlisted in the military, women entered the workforce in the military. On the home front, people planted victory gardens, conserved materials, coped with rationing, and paid income taxes. African Americans participated in both military and civilian jobs, but experienced continued discrimination despite Roosevelt's establishment of the Fair Employment Practices Committee. Discrimination against Latinos erupted in riots in California, while racial prejudice towards Japanese Americans and war hysteria resulted in forced relocation, internment, and a violation of the constitutional rights of these American citizens. The Holocaust, Hitler's brutal attempt to exterminate all the Jews in Europe, resulted in the deaths of about 6 million European Jews and perhaps 5 million others. American General Douglas MacArthur and Admiral Chester Nimitz led U.S. forces in the Pacific Theater of War, while General Dwight Eisenhower led the Allied forces in Europe. After the D-Day invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944, Allied forces drove east toward Germany, while Soviet forces advanced on Berlin from the east. The war ended in Europe in May 1945. Led by J. Robert Oppenheimer, researchers in the United States built upon the works of Albert Einstein to develop an atomic bomb before the Germans. The war in the Pacific brought both victories, Midway, and defeat, Bataan, and ultimately ended in 1945, following the dropping of atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. World War II transformed the American economy, society, and government, and the country emerged from the war as the richest, most powerful nation in the world. Okay, and then don't forget to take the 3.13 quiz. Good luck, everyone, and be sure to review the prior lessons as well. Review lessons 309, 3.10, 311, and 312. So there'll be several lessons all included in the 313 quiz. Good luck. Do your best.